In Module 3, we're going to talk about how you can become a top applicant in your admissions niche for law school admissions. Now, in Module 2, we took the list of law schools that you developed in Module 1, and we used that to get a rough idea of what you need to do to show the law schools that you can meet and exceed the academic and intellectual requirements that they're looking for. So we talked about what you can do to get the LSAT score that you need, what you can do to get your GPA in order, and then what you can do for the third part, which is the more subjective area where you can really show them what unique intellectual gifts you can bring to the table. And you should, after doing Module 2, really have a list here of intellectual and academic areas that are unique, that are interesting, and that really you can bring to the table to the intellectual community, which is the law school that you want to go to. Now, what we're going to do from here is take that list of intellectual and academic interests that you have, and we're going to start to use that to shape a strategy for how you can become a standout applicant. Now, I think the important thing here to think about is really to reflect on a general question, but probably the most common question that people ask in the law school admissions process, and that is, what are top-tier law schools looking for? And one of if you pose this kind of a question at a ordinary law school info session with an admissions dean or representative, the answer that they typically give you is that we're looking for passion, or we're looking for what you're interested in, or what makes you unique. And these are all true, but they don't really get to the crux of the matter, and they don't really give you concrete guidance on what you need to be doing, because at the end of the day, they can't. Law school admissions is a zero-sum game. You're dealing with a very competitive process where it's not enough to be passionate or unique or whatever. You have to do something that will set you apart and make sure that you're one of the couple hundred people who ultimately get into the law school that you want. So, I mean, to answer this question, what are top-tier law schools looking for? The answer that I am going to offer you and that I would encourage you to think about is that top-tier law schools want you to be the best or one of the very few people in an area that they care about. So, what do they care about? And we already touched on that in Module 2. They want to see someone who's intellectually and academically rigorous, who will really contribute something to the legal profession. And then let's move to the first part. What do they mean by how can you be how can you be the best? And in terms of how you can be the best, one of the things that I would urge you to think about is that there are certain areas that have very clear hierarchies and rankings where it's pretty easy for the law school to tell whether or not you're at the top of your game. So a good example here might be if you're involved in college debate. And here, obviously, debate is an intellectual and academic exercise that very much pertains to a core skill set that is important for law school and ultimately is important for legal practitioners. And then if you participate in debate competitions and tournaments and whatever, there's enough competition, there's enough of a hierarchy and rating and ranking system that they sort of know who's at the top of your game. So if you're really featuring this idea or this notion that you're a good debater, you need to show evidence that you're at or near the top. And if you're simply kind of a mediocre, middling debater at a college or in a program that isn't noted for producing top-tier debaters, then what they're going to do is basically say, okay, he's the debate guy, and they're going to compare you to other debate people, and there almost certainly will be others who you're competing against, and if they have other people applying who are doing better in this competition than you, that's not going to look very good. So, so what I would do is at the outset, take that list of intellectual and academic interests that you have, and note next to it which one of these have some kind of competition, some kind of metric where there is a very clear hierarchy, where there is some kind of a clear ranking system. And then for those activities that do have a clear ranking system, the question that you need to reflect on and think about is, are you at the top of the competition, or if you're not, is there a way to get there? And this is going to require a lot of brutal honesty and reflection, because if you're really passionate about something, but you're not really at the top of this competition, then I think you really need to think twice about whether or not you want to continue to do that, spend time and energy and resources on that, and ultimately feature that in your law school application. Another very common example here might be if you're very involved with the student newspaper. And this is a tough one because, even if you become for one thing, each of these college papers have a masthead that is relatively hierarchical. So if you're not the editor-in-chief of your paper, you're now inevitably going to be competing against people who are editors-in-chief, and you have already sort of a certain barrier, at least a psychological barrier, for the admissions officers to overcome. And then even if you are the editor-in-chief of your paper, you're going to be spending enormous amounts of time working on that, time that could be going into getting your GPA and LSAT up. And then the question you have to think about is, what have you done to show them that among all the editors-in-chief who are going to be applying, what is it about you that makes you the best among these other editors-in-chief? It's a high bar to meet, but I think it can be met if you think about it in a certain way. Now, what if your intellectual area, academic area, or sort of some kind of extracurricular is something where there isn't a clear hierarchy, or there isn't a clear ranking or metric system, and I think that in many ways is an opportunity. So the first thing to think about here is, once you really identify these areas that you might want to feature in your application, the first thing to think about is, even if there isn't a very clear hierarchy like there might be in a newspaper or in a debate competition, there may be certain indicators or sort of things that are going to generally sort of alert admissions officers to whether or not you are really at the top of your game. So one example might be, let's say you really feature the fact that you like doing unique historical research, and you've gotten all A's in all of your history classes, and you're really passionate about American history, and you talk about how you want to maybe pursue a career sort of in some way involved with American history. Well, there may not be a direct ranking here, but one of the things that you have to keep in mind is there is a whole history profession. There is a whole group of people who really make the study of history sort of their full-time job, and you are going to be competing with people who are, maybe they've already done a PhD in history, or maybe they're doing a JD PhD. Maybe there's someone who's been a history teacher. Maybe there's been someone who's already published academic papers in history. Maybe there are people who've done archival research. So, think about, if there are other indicators that are going to alert admissions officers to whether or not where you are in this broad order. Now, how do you get out? You know, if you're listening to this and you're freaking out and you're thinking, wow, I mean, I'm not the best at anything, or I'm not at the top of any hierarchy. Well, that's not a problem, because there's a third way here to show the law school that you're the best applicant they have in an area they care about, and that is to create your own category. Um, and this is actually much easier than it sounds if you really think about it. And the way to do it, there are a lot of different ways to do it, but one of the ways that I would think about is um, look at all the areas that you identified in Module 2, um, and dig down deeper and deeper and deeper, and really think about what it is within this broad area that you really care about. So maybe you know a lot about, let's say you're very interested in Bitcoin. Well, okay, a lot of people are interested in Bitcoin, but what are you really interested in Bitcoin? Are you interested in um, how to make money trading Bitcoin? Are you interested in how Bitcoin might transform the global economy? Are you interested in security threats around Bitcoin? Are you interested in thinking about the future of Bitcoin or alternatives to Bitcoin? Do you have a really provocative argument or thesis about Bitcoin? But what I would say is dig deeper and deeper and deeper until you really figure out sort of this interest at a level of detail where you're basically the first person who's even thinking about it. Another way to think about this would be to combine 2 or 3 different interests. So let's say you have a passion for entrepreneurship, and let's say that you also have an interest in criminal law. So, you know, entrepreneurship's very common. A lot of people who are doing a JD MBA are going to probably have some entrepreneurship background. There are probably going to be people who worked at a startup. They're doing entrepreneurial things. And then obviously criminal issues, criminal justice is a very common, very popular thing that brings people to law school. But think about where these areas intersect, and all of a sudden you're in a lot of new, interesting realms. Is there some kind of innovation, maybe a legal innovation, maybe a technological one, maybe a new paradigm that you can think of that's innovative, that's going to then sort of transform or change the way we think about criminality, or that we think about justice, or think about punishment, or the Constitution. You know, think about different combinations of things, how you can blend different interests, and then think about what are some projects or activities or things that you can take on. So maybe you can, you know, take your interest in entrepreneurship and in criminal justice, and then figure out some kind of a theory or a project, and then go out and actually do it in a certain part of the country where it's never been done. That would be interesting. And then, you know, you can do that kind of a project, and then maybe you can come to some kind of a very develop some kind of innovative argument or take that might be new to the people reading your application. A final thought I'll make here on how to be a unique or a standout applicant is ask yourself, what issue or what set of issues do you have a contrarian or a new viewpoint on? What is a viewpoint or a perspective that would be interesting to have in a law school seminar that may not be very common? So, for example, maybe you know, maybe politically you're at one end or another end of the spectrum that isn't very popular. I mean, stereotypically, I would say most students are sort of center-left Democrats. So maybe you're maybe you're someone who's very, very conservative in a religious way, and you come from a certain part of the country where the Bible and other things really shape your worldview. That might be interesting. that might be something you can explore. Maybe you've thought about, maybe you've really studied financial markets, and you've thought about legal regulation in financial markets, and maybe you've come to the conclusion that there's some area in finance that needs much more regulation than people are thinking about, or a new regulatory paradigm altogether. Some kind of a new perspective that's going to be relevant to law school that you can bring to the table and show that you not only are just some provocateur, but you're actually, you have a new, well thought out, creative way of looking at an issue, one that really has substance and rigor and that sets you apart from everyone else. So these are just 3 different examples, but what I would say is take that list you have, your academic, intellectual areas, dig into them deeply, or combine them, or think about your unique kind of vision or angle around that issue. See what you come up with, and then try to think about concrete activities, concrete projects, things that you can do to demonstrate that you're the best at your field. And once you do that, if you do this right, you'll figure out a way, no matter who you are, no matter what you're interested in, to really present yourself as someone who's at the top of their field, the top of their area, and that'll really make you stand out from the competition.